here. By leaving the viewer largely oblivious about the details of Sikh politics, I want to convey the idea of Canada as a country that has inherited a political tradition that the vast majority of Canadians do not understand or care about, and how this deep asymmetry of passion between Sikh and non-Sikh Canadians has affected the events I'm about to describe. What I will say is only this. There is an idea in Punjab Sikh culture that India is oppressive to the Sikhs, and Punjab should therefore become an independent country for the Sikhs called Khalistan. People who buy into this idea are called Khalistanis, and it tends to be associated with folks on the more fundamentalist end of the Sikh religious spectrum. For whatever reason, Khalistanism has proven popular with many Sikhs in Canada, and like many political ideologies, there is unfortunately also a violent manifestation of Khalistanism as well, and this too is present in Canada. In June of 1985, a small cell of Khalistani extremists here in British Columbia successfully got a bomb placed on an Air India flight destined for Mumbai. En route to a stopover in London, the plane blew up over the Celtic Sea, killing all 329 people on board, most of them young Indo-Canadian families on their way to visit relatives. It was the worst North American terrorist attack prior to 9/11. Despite the spectacular nature of the attack, the dominant Canadian reaction was confusion and apathy, however. Because the killers and most of their victims were of Indian background, many of Canada's non-Indian majority interpreted the attack as a tragic but exotic event of little relevance to mainstream Canada. To this day, the attack has never really entered the Canadian imagination as one of the great tragedies of our history. And I'm sure there are many young Canadians watching this right now who are hearing about it for the first time. This was partially an indictment of Canadian racism, the idea that Indo-Canadians somehow didn't really count in the way that other Canadians do. But it was also a revelation that a unique flavor of political violence had come to Canada that the majority of Canadians were relatively indifferent to. The ensuing arrest and failed prosecution of the Air India bombers is seen as a similarly damning indictment of Canadian society. During the trial of the attack's two surviving ringleaders, which took 18 years to organize and ended with the acquittal of both, it was revealed that the Canadian police and intelligence services had not taken the threat of Sikh extremism particularly seriously in the lead-up to the attack, and had accordingly failed to provide the government with enough evidence to prove the guilt of either man. At one point, it was revealed that Canadian intelligence here in BC, the center of Canada's Sikh community, didn't even have any agents who spoke the Punjabi language. The perceived incompetence of Canadian authorities in bringing justice to these men, who had caused so much trauma for hundreds of Indian families, contributed to a worsening of relations between Canada and India. Indian diplomats had expressed concern about Sikh extremists operating in Canada prior to the attack, and there was a sense that if Canadian officials had taken these worries more seriously, perhaps more could have been done. On the other end of the spectrum, Canada's failure to convict anyone in relation to the Air India bombing provided cover to fundamentalist Sikhs eager to hold two somewhat contradictory ideas about the men accused of masterminding the attack. They were somehow simultaneously believed to be great heroes of the Khalistani cause, but at the same time, completely innocent men who hadn't actually done anything. In fact, the Indian government had probably blown up that plane themselves to frame them. By all accounts, supporters of this conspiracy theory and other forms of apologism and support for Khalistani terrorism continued to enjoy a stable base in Canada over the decades. A notorious embodiment of this is the tendency of some Sikh temples in Canada to proudly display big posters of Tarwinder Singh Parmar, who was the Canadian founder of the terrorist group that planned the Air India bombing. Parmar, an immigrant who had fled back to India after the attacks and was later killed by police there, remains perhaps the most recognizable symbol of Sikh extremism in Canada, easily identifiable by his big yellow turban with the little blue cloth on top. Now, what makes this situation uniquely politically complicated is that during this same period, Sikhs were starting to emerge as a powerful voting bloc in Canada. In the 1980s, the Canadian census estimated that there were less than 70,000 Sikhs in Canada, mostly in British Columbia. Today, that number has increased tenfold to over 700,000, or about 2% of the Canadian population, which is actually about the same as their share of the population in India. Though BC continues to have Canada's largest Sikh population, there are now substantial Sikh communities all across the country, and you can see Sikh temples everywhere from Edmonton to Montreal. I should just take a moment here to state clearly that although we are mostly talking about Sikh extremism and terrorism today, the vast majority of Canadian Sikhs are, of course, perfectly lovely, kind, peaceful people. The rise of a large Sikh Canadian middle class is, in fact, one of the great triumphs of Canadian multiculturalism and assimilation. The steady progression of a people once associated with low-status jobs like taxi drivers and gas station attendants into a prosperous community increasingly filled with doctors and lawyers and businessmen. And politicians. Sikh Canadians, like Indo-Canadians more broadly, have proven very politically savvy and are probably among Canada's most disproportionately successful minority group at the political level. The first Sikh member of the Canadian Parliament was elected in 1993, and since then there have been dozens of practicing Sikhs elected at both the federal and provincial level, along with multiple Sikh cabinet ministers. The current Canadian Parliament features 15 self-identified Sikhs, including Defence Minister Harjit Sajjan and Tim Uppal, the deputy leader of the Conservative Party. Prime Minister Trudeau actually bragged a while ago that he had more Sikhs in his cabinet than Prime Minister Modi did in India.
I have more Sikhs in my cabinet than Modi does.
Now, why Sikhs are so successful in Canadian politics isn't simply a matter of there being a lot of Sikhs in Canada, although that's obviously part of it. As I wrote in this 2019 article for the Washington Post, a lot of it has to do with how political candidates are chosen in Canada. So in Canada, a political party's candidates for the federal or provincial parliament are not appointed by the party hierarchy like they are in Europe, nor are they elected by the general public like they are in the US. Rather, they are chosen by small in-person gatherings of a few hundred party supporters. This is a very old-fashioned system in which a candidate literally just has to wrangle up enough friends from the community to win a popularity contest in a high school auditorium or whatever. And it's a system that selects for a certain type of politician more than others. Religious people in general tend to do very well in this system, since church is a great place to wrangle up supporters. And Sikhs tend to do particularly well, since their temples tend to be organized quite hierarchically, meaning a politician allied with the temple leadership can often count on getting a lot of bodies to show up at his nomination meeting. The problem is that some of the most politically active members of many Sikh Gurdwaras in Canada also tend to be really into the Khalistani stuff. Not like the active terrorist side, but certainly some of the terrorist apologist or conspiracy theory side. The posters of Talwinder Singh Parmar set. And as a result, a lot of Canadian politicians of all religions and in all of the major parties behave as if Khalistanis are a significant enough force in Canadian politics to not be worth offending, and maybe even worth courting. So here are some examples. In 2018, Prime Minister Trudeau went on a rather tense trip to India, the Modi administration having quite a lot of skepticism of Canada's seriousness in dealing with radical Khalistanis who India continued to claim were still using Canada as a base for organizing terrorist attacks.
Therefore, the sovereignty of our states, the unity of our states, all those who challenge these, we cannot tolerate them.
Trudeau's delegation included Member of Parliament Randeep Sarai, a Sikh politician considered on the somewhat soft on Khalistani's side of things, who in turn brought along a guy called Jaspal Atwal, an Indo-Canadian activist in the British Columbia wing of Trudeau's Liberal Party. Jaspal Atwal, as it turned out, was also a one-time member of a Khalistani terrorist group. In 1986, a minister from the Punjab government had come to BC to attend a relative's wedding and was shot twice by a gang of men that included Mr. Atwal. He would later serve 5 years for attempted murder. Now, everyone in Trudeau's